The lock on my apartment door had been broken for 6 weeks. I kept meaning to call the landlord, kept meaning to do a lot of things. But after Vanessa left, after she'd packed her half of the books and all of the silverware and the framed photograph of us in Montauk that I didn't even know I cared about until I saw the nail hole where it used to hang. After all of that, the broken things in my life had started to feel appropriate. Like the apartment was finally matching the person living in it. I came home from a 12-hour shift at the hospital. I was a radiology tech, the kind of job that sounds interesting at parties but is mostly sitting in dim rooms reading shadows on screens. And I smelled coffee. Not old coffee, not the stale ghost of yesterday's pot. Fresh coffee. Someone had used my machine within the last 20 minutes. I should have turned around. I should have called the police. Instead, I walked toward the kitchen, because some part of me, the part that Vanessa had correctly identified as my most dangerous quality, refused to believe the world could actually hurt me. Pathological optimism, she'd called it, during the divorce. You don't trust people because you believe in them, Marcus. You trust them because you can't stand the idea that you shouldn't. She was sitting at my kitchen table. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a way that had been neat hours ago but was now half collapsed. A wool coat over what looked like a dress, something you'd wear to a work function, not to break into a stranger's apartment. No shoes. Her feet were bare and dirty, and there was a cut across the top of her left foot that had bled and dried and bled again. She looked up at me, and her expression wasn't fear exactly. It was calculation. She was measuring me the way I'd seen patients measure a diagnosis, trying to decide whether to fight it or accept it. Your door was open, she said. Not unlocked, open, like someone had already been here. Nobody's been here. Then you left your front door open. I had. I remembered now. I'd been carrying groceries that morning, made 2 trips, and on the second trip I'd gotten a call from the hospital asking me to come in early. I'd walked right out without pulling it shut. That still doesn't explain why you're sitting in my kitchen. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Her nails were clean, well-shaped, no rings. Because I've been walking for 4 hours and I can't feel my feet, and your door was the first one that was open. And I know how that sounds, and I don't care. There was a bruise along her jawline, fading from purple to that sickly yellow-green that meant it was days old, not hours. I noticed it the way I noticed everything, clinically, automatically, already building a differential diagnosis in my head before remembering that this wasn't a scan. This was a woman in my kitchen. What's your name? Does it matter? It does if you're staying long enough to finish that coffee. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not warmth, not yet. Just a small unclenching, like a fist loosening one finger at a time. Naomi, she said. And I need one night. Just one. I'll be gone before you wake up. She wasn't gone before I woke up. I found her on the couch at 6 a.m., still in the wool coat, curled in a way that made her look smaller than she was. The coffee mug was rinsed and sitting in the dish rack. My laptop was open on the table. She'd been looking at bus schedules. I made eggs because I didn't know what else to do. The sound of the pan woke her, and she came into the kitchen blinking, disoriented, like someone surfacing from deep water. You should eat, I said, and she sat down and ate without arguing, which told me more about her situation than anything she'd said the night before. Over breakfast, she gave me pieces, not the whole story. Naomi wasn't someone who handed you the full picture. She gave you fragments and let you assemble them yourself, and if you got it wrong, she wouldn't correct you. That was the first thing about her that made me uneasy. Not the breaking in, not the bruise, but the way she controlled information like currency, spending only what was absolutely necessary. Her husband's name was Daniel Kessler. The name meant nothing to me then. She told me he was in consulting. She told me they'd been married 3 years. She told me she'd left last night after a dinner party at their home, where he'd grabbed her wrist under the table hard enough to leave marks, because she'd contradicted him in front of a colleague. "Why not a shelter?" I asked. "Because he's on the board of the largest domestic violence nonprofit in the city." She said it flatly, without irony, the way you state an impossible fact. "He knows the intake coordinators by name. He plays golf with the district attorney. He donated a wing to the women's health clinic on 4th Street. She paused. "Tell me where I'm supposed to go that he hasn't already built himself a door into." I let that settle. It was worse than I'd imagined, and I'd imagined plenty. "One more night," I said. "Then we figure something out." The "we" slipped out before I could catch it. She noticed. I could tell by the way she looked at me. Cautious, almost suspicious, like I'd revealed a card I should have kept hidden. One more night became 3. 3 became a week. I told myself it was proximity and pity. I told myself it was the doctor-adjacent instinct, the need to triage and treat. I told myself a lot of things that first week, because the alternative, that I was already invested, already entangled, already making someone else's catastrophe part of my own architecture, was the exact pattern Vanessa had warned me about. You absorb other people's damage because it's easier than looking at your own. That was the last thing she'd said to me before signing the papers. She wasn't wrong. She was rarely wrong about me, which was part of why I couldn't be married to her anymore. Naomi was not easy to live with. She left lights on in every room. She washed dishes immediately after using them, but left her clothes in small piles on the bathroom floor. She read voraciously, 3 books that first week, all from my shelf, and left them open face down on surfaces, cracking the spines without apology. She also had a temper. Not explosive, not violent. Precise. When I suggested she contact her sister in Philadelphia, she turned on me with a quietness that was more cutting than any shout. "You think I haven't thought of that? You think in 4 hours of walking barefoot through this city, I didn't run through every name in my phone? My sister hasn't spoken to me in 2 years. Daniel made sure of that. He told her I was drinking again. I was never drinking, Marcus. I never had a drinking problem. But he told her, and he told my mother. And he was so concerned, so loving, so goddamn convincing, that they staged an intervention in my own living room while he stood in the doorway looking heartbroken." She stopped, breathed, sat down. "Don't tell me to call my sister." "Okay," I said. "I won't." That night she told me more. How Daniel had moved her to this city, away from everyone she knew. How he'd encouraged her to leave her job. She'd been a copy editor at a publishing house. Because he earned enough, and wouldn't she rather focus on herself for a while? How focusing on herself had turned into isolation so gradual, she didn't recognize it until she was standing in their kitchen at 2 a.m., realizing she couldn't name a single person in the city who would answer her call. "That's the thing about smart abusers," she said. "They don't lock the door. They just make sure you forget where it is." Daniel found me on a Tuesday. Not at my apartment. At the hospital. He came to the radiology department and asked for me by name at the front desk, and Amy, who had no reason to suspect anything, directed him to the reading room where I was reviewing chest CTs. He was exactly what I should have expected. Tall, well-dressed, the kind of handsome that comes with good bone structure and better grooming. He carried himself like someone who is used to rooms rearranging themselves around his arrival. "Marcus Webb?" He extended his hand. I didn't take it. He withdrew it without embarrassment. "I think you know my wife." The way he said, "my wife," possessive and casual simultaneously, the way you'd say, "my car" or "my jacket," told me everything I needed to know about Daniel Kessler. "I don't know what you're talking about." He smiled. It was a good smile. Patient. Warm, even. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to know she's safe. She left without her medication. She's on a prescription regimen, and missing doses can be dangerous. I'm worried about her." The detail was brilliant. Specific enough to sound legitimate, vague enough to avoid verification. If I'd been anyone else, I might have believed him. "I can't help you," I said. He sat down in the chair across from my workstation, uninvited. "Marcus, I understand your hesitation. Really, I do. Naomi can be very convincing. She has a history of these episodes, leaving suddenly, telling people stories. I love her, but she's not well. I've been trying to get her into treatment for years." He leaned forward. "I know what this looks like from the outside. I know what she probably told you. But I need you to consider the possibility that you're being manipulated by a very sick woman." I stared at the light box, the gray and white landscape of someone's lungs, the quiet certainty of what was shadow and what was solid. "Get out of my department." He stood, buttoned his jacket. "I've already spoken with your department head, Dr. Ferris. She's a friend. We served on the hospital gala committee together last year." He let that land. "I told her I was concerned about a personal situation involving one of her staff. I didn't give details, but I could." There it was. Not a threat, a demonstration. "Think about what you're risking," he said, "for a woman you've known for 2 weeks." After he left, I sat in the dark of the reading room for 20 minutes, my hands flat on the desk, feeling my own pulse in my fingertips. He'd come to my workplace. He knew my name, my department, my supervisor. He'd positioned himself not as a threat, but as a concerned husband, and he'd done it in a setting where I couldn't react without consequences. I pulled up the hospital directory. Dr. Meredith Ferris, head of radiology. Board member, hospital gala co-chair. And there in the gala photos from last year's fundraiser, Daniel Kessler, black tie, holding a champagne flute, Meredith Ferris laughing beside him. He had leverage. Real leverage. I drove home that night with the specific physical sensation of a trap closing. The argument happened 3 days later, after Naomi found the visitor log I'd printed from the hospital security system. "You printed this? From the hospital system?" She held the paper like it was contaminated. "I needed a record. Proof he came to my workplace. This has my name on it. If this gets into a legal proceeding, he'll know exactly where I've been. He'll subpoena your visitor logs, your employee records. Marcus, you've just handed him a map." "I was trying to protect you." "You were trying to protect yourself. You wanted documentation so you could feel like you were doing something useful instead of just standing in it. That's what you do. You turn other people's crises into projects so you don't have to sit with the helplessness." The accuracy of it stunned me. Not because it was cruel, but because it was the same thing Vanessa had said. The same diagnosis from a completely different doctor. And at some point, I had to stop treating the pattern as coincidence and start treating it as pathology. "Maybe you should leave then." I said it before I could stop myself. The words came out cold, controlled, and I watched her face go still. "Maybe I should." She went into the bedroom. I heard drawers opening, the rustle of the few clothes she'd accumulated. Things I'd bought her, which made the whole scene worse. I stood in the kitchen listening to a woman pack to leave my life for the second time in 2 years, and I understood, finally, what Vanessa had meant. I didn't absorb people's damage out of compassion. I did it because their crises gave me a role, a purpose, a reason to avoid the terrifying blankness of my own unstructured life. And the moment they reflected that back to me, I pushed them out. I went to the bedroom door. "Don't go." She was sitting on the bed, coat on, shoes on, a plastic bag of belongings in her hand. She looked up at me, And for the first time since that first night, I saw the full weight of her exhaustion. Not from Daniel, not from running, but from the grinding work of depending on someone and not knowing if they'd hold. "Tell me why," she said. "Because you're right. About all of it. And I'd rather be uncomfortable with someone who tells me the truth than comfortable alone with my own excuses." She set the bag down. She didn't smile, but she took off the coat. There was a night, about a month in, when I came home and found her asleep on the couch with a book open on her chest. I stood there in the doorway longer than I should have, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not desire, though that was there too, persistent and inconvenient and completely beside the point. What I felt was specific and terrifying. I felt like I was home. I sat down carefully on the edge of the couch. She woke, half asleep, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Her hand came up and rested against my chest, over the sternum, like she was checking for a heartbeat. "You're warm," she said, still half in a dream. "I've been told." She smiled. It was small, involuntary, and the most honest expression I'd seen on her face. I covered her hand with mine. We stayed like that for a long time, neither of us willing to name what was happening, both of us aware that naming it would make it real, and real things could be taken away. Daniel made his move 6 weeks after Naomi first walked through my door. He didn't come himself this time. He sent a letter, not to me but to Dr. Ferris, delivered via the hospital's legal counsel. The letter alleged that I was harboring his estranged wife, that I was interfering in a domestic situation, and that my judgment and professional conduct should be reviewed. It referenced my divorce. It referenced a noise complaint from my building 2 years ago, a party that had gotten out of hand long before Naomi. It painted a picture of an unstable man who had inserted himself into a vulnerable woman's life. Dr. Ferris called me into her office on a Thursday morning. She was professional, not unkind. She told me the hospital couldn't ignore a formal complaint, that HR would be involved, that there would be a review. She told me she wasn't asking about my personal life, but that optics mattered. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" she asked. I thought about Naomi, about the bus schedules still open on my laptop, about the bruise that had faded weeks ago but whose yellow ghost I could still trace in my memory, about the filing she'd done 2 weeks earlier, the restraining order application that was still pending, the police report that had been received with more skepticism than urgency. "No," I said, "there isn't." The review lasted 3 weeks. During that time, I was moved from the reading room to archival duties, filing, data entry, the kind of work that was technically not a demotion but felt like one. Colleagues noticed. 2 of them asked if everything was okay. One of them, Jeff from cardiology, told me he'd heard I was in some kind of trouble with a woman, and offered this insight with the delighted concern of someone who feeds on proximity to drama. Naomi watched what was happening to my career and said nothing for 2 days. On the 3rd day, she sat across from me at dinner and spoke carefully. "I can leave. Find a shelter in another city. If I'm gone, he has no reason to keep pressing you." "And then what?" "He wins. He proves that he can make anyone who helps you disappear." "He doesn't have to win forever. Just long enough for me to disappear properly. That's all I need." "That's not a life, Naomi." "It's the one I have." "It's not the one you have to keep." She looked at me the way she'd looked at me that first night, calculating, measuring, deciding whether to trust the open door. "I don't know how to be someone who stays," she said. "He took that from me, the ability to stay." Then we both learned something new. The restraining order was granted in late March. It wasn't dramatic. A judge signed a paper.
Daniel Kessler was ordered to maintain 500 feet of distance. It felt like nothing and everything simultaneously.
The hospital review concluded without formal action, though a note was placed in my file, the administrative equivalent of a warning shot. Dr. Ferris told me she considered the matter closed, but suggested I be mindful of entanglements. I didn't tell her that mindfulness was the one thing I'd never been good at. Naomi moved into her own apartment in April, a studio above a dry cleaner's on the east side. She hated it. The pipes rattled, the windows didn't seal properly, and the hallway smelled permanently of chemical solvents. But it was hers, and the lease had only her name on it. And the first night she slept there alone, she called me at midnight and said, "I locked the door, and it was my lock." And the pride in her voice was so fierce, it nearly broke me. We saw each other 3-4 times a week. We didn't define it. We were careful with each other in ways that people who've been shattered are careful. Testing weight before stepping, checking foundations before building. My mother called in May. Someone, I didn't ask who, I didn't want to know, had told her I was seeing a married woman. I tried to explain. She listened, then said, "Marcus, you have always found women who need saving. I just wish once you'd find one who didn't." I hung up and sat with that for a long time. Because she wasn't entirely wrong. And that was the uncomfortable geography of loving Naomi, the constant question of whether what I felt was genuine connection or the old compulsion dressed in better clothes. Whether I was choosing her or choosing the familiar shape of crisis. Whether love and pattern could coexist, and if they could, whether that made the love less real. I didn't have an answer. I still don't. Naomi got a job in June, editing for a small press that published literary fiction and poetry. The pay was modest, the work consuming. She came alive in a way I hadn't seen before, arguing about M-dashes, reading manuscripts on the bus, sending me texts at 10 p.m. that said things like, "This paragraph is so good I want to scream," followed by the page number. On a warm evening in July, we sat on the fire escape of her terrible apartment. She'd been drinking wine. I'd been drinking water because I had an early shift. The city hummed below us, that low-frequency urban vibration that sounds like the earth breathing. "I'm still married," she said. "I know." "The divorce will take months, maybe longer. He'll fight it." "I know that too." She turned to look at me. "And you're still here." "I'm still here." "That scares me more than he does." I understood what she meant. Daniel was a known quantity, a predictable threat, a pattern she'd already learned to navigate. What I represented was open space, and open space is terrifying when you've lived in a cage. Every direction is a possible wrong turn. Every choice is uncharted. "It scares me too," I said. And I meant it in every sense available. The vulnerability, the repetition, the genuine possibility that I was rebuilding the same house on the same fault line and calling it growth. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I felt the weight of her against me, slight but definite, the physical fact of another person choosing proximity. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't need to. What we had was something more precarious and more honest. Two people sitting in the gap between who they'd been and who they were trying to become. Not pretending the gap was closed, just agreeing to sit in it together. It's October now. The lock on my apartment door has been fixed for months. Naomi has a key, though she doesn't use it often. She comes through the front door, knocks twice, even though she doesn't have to, a small ritual that I think matters to her. The act of being invited in, the act of choosing to enter. The divorce proceedings are underway. Daniel's lawyers are expensive and aggressive. There are days Naomi comes to my apartment pale and quiet, carrying the weight of depositions and contested assets and the particular cruelty of a man who cannot stand to lose what he considers property. There are days I wonder if my mother was right. There are days I'm certain she wasn't. The note is still in my hospital file. My relationship with Dr. Ferris is professional, but cooler than it used to be. My sister thinks I moved too fast. Naomi's sister in Philadelphia still won't return her calls. None of this is resolved. None of this is clean. But last Tuesday, Naomi brought a manuscript home from the press, a debut novel by a writer no one had heard of yet, about a woman rebuilding her life in a city where she knows no one. She handed it to me and said, "I edited this. Every comma, every line break. This is mine." And the look on her face was not happiness exactly. It was something sturdier than happiness. It was the expression of a person standing in her own life, finally, after years of standing in someone else's. I think about that night sometimes. The open door, the smell of coffee, the woman at my kitchen table with bare, bleeding feet. I think about how easy it would have been to call the police, how reasonable, how safe. I think about all the locked doors in the world and the few that stay open, and I still can't tell you whether leaving mine unlatched that night was carelessness or grace. I just know that some questions don't need answers. They just need you to keep living inside them.